frightening, scary. Wonder if you're going to be alive the next morning. That's about the description of the jump itself. I joined the Army, my part of the service, September 1942, because they had something that I wanted. There was a specialty outfit that they just designed called the Experimental Unit 506 Parachute Infantry, something brand new at the time. I was looking for something different. I didn't want to be drafted. In the newspaper and magazines, this new unit being formed, Parachute Infantry Unit. It looked very interesting, and it was for me. I said, okay, I'm going to try it. So I went over to Fort Monroe. Fort Monroe was the Army headquarters at that time. The Pentagon was built but not occupied, just finished. When I got over to Fort Monroe, they explained it to me, what was going on. And they said I had to be 20 years old. I was only 19. Had to have my mother sign. So one of the guys said, where's your mother? I said, well, it so happens that she's in the car. He said, all you got to do is get her to sign it, you're in. Of course, my mother wasn't in the car, she was home, and neither did about 1,000 others in my same petition. Their mother signed it as well, like me. So I signed it, I joined the 506 Parachute Infantry. Strictly an experimental unit, 7,000 people qualified for it, 7,000. They only needed 2,500. So then the picking started. They had to get dwindled down to 2,500. And they put us through the worst you could possibly think of to weed us out, which they did. They came up with 2,500 of the finest men in the country. Frightening, scary. Wonder if you're going to be alive the next morning. That's about the description of the jump itself. What happened was, I wasn't supposed to be on that plane, but because of a writer, a British writer from the Associated Press, took my seat in the plane that I was supposed to be on, and I had to go to a different airplane at the last minute, not knowing what the hell I was going to do. I didn't know anybody there. Finally, I got my seat, sat in the plane. Everything was very quiet, naturally. Everybody was in his own thoughts. Finally, when the red light went on, time for me to jump, the man in front of me slipped on the floor. I had to help him up to get up with all the stuff he had. He had about 150, 200 pounds of material on him, besides his weight. Got him on his feet, hooked up, got him out the door. By that time, I didn't know where in the hell I was. No one else did. Jumped out of the plane, and it seemed like it took me a half hour to get down. Well, actually, it was about 50 minutes from plane to the ground. But I never did land on the ground. I landed in a bunch of cows in a barn. Later on, I found out it was the Carnation Milk Company barn, and they were cows being ready to be shipped to Germany, prize cows from Normandy. I got myself together, scared to death, of course, not knowing where I was, had no idea because I was supposed to. I was the operations sergeant. I made the sand tables for the jump so people would know where they were when they got on the ground. Things scattered around so bad, nobody, only one plane hit the ground where it was supposed to be. that was #1 plane that I was supposed to be on. And on that plane, everybody on that plane was either captured or murdered, including my battalion commander. Finally, I decided I had to get out to where I was. I didn't know where I was, had no idea. Had I known then that what I know now, I wouldn't be here, because I would have dropped dead from a heart faint. Because I was in a town called Carrington, which I notified my people on the sand table to absolutely avoid at all costs because of a heavy concentration of enemy in that town. I didn't find out till about 10 minutes later, when I finally picked up about 6, 8 men, and I told them, I said, look, I have an idea where to go, but I have no idea where I am. No one else did. And they were scared to death. Of course, I wasn't exactly happy, but at least I had my senses about it. I was supposed to be the operations sergeant, so I was supposed to know something. So finally I said to the men, I said, look, all we're doing is just heading in the direction that I think. I said, what we ought to do is stop by one of these farmhouses. I said, this is it's in Normandy. And I said, these people know the ground. They know where they are. They're the smartest farmers in the world. Let's find out from them to tell us where we are exactly. They said, okay. Of course, they would agree anything that I wanted at that time, because they were really scared to death. I wasn't exactly happy. Finally, we came to this farmhouse, knocked on the door, firing everywhere. Ack fire, stuff in the ground, in the air, on the ground. The farmer and his wife came to the door. She started screaming. I grabbed her by the face, put my hand on her mouth, put her down on the floor, got him down on the floor, and I told him what little words that I knew, direction, French directions. He understood, and I told him it was the invasion. So he understood with all this noise going around him. So I opened up the maps underneath a raincoat with a flashlight, and I said to him, pointing out on a map, I said, St. Mary Église, that was a town near where we were supposed to land. And he said, oui, and he pointed this way. I said, St. Mary Église, oui. St. Côme de Mont, oui. Now move the map around a little bit to orient it. Got to 2 more places. Finally I said, Carrington. And he knocked on the ground. Bing, bing, bing. He said, oui, Carrington. So I yelled at him. I said, Carrington, Carrington. He said, oui, on the ground. So then I realized he was telling me that we landed in Carrington, which scared the living hell out of me right then and there. So I told the guys, I said, let's get the hell out of here right now. I know where I am. So we got out of there. We headed direction of the bridges where we were supposed to have our mission. And we were about 5 miles away. So that picked up about 21 men total, and all of them scared to death. Of course, I wasn't exactly happy. I didn't want to show them that I was scared to death as well. So I did a pretty good job. And finally, we picked up an officer, a captain. So I said, Captain, I said, fine. Told him where we were. And I said, take over. He said, no. He said, you look like you know what you're doing. I'll follow you. So I had a captain and 21 other enlisted men to take to the bridges. On the way to the bridges, we were stopped in the middle of the woods, It was the headquarter company of the 502nd, Colonel Johnson. He was the commanding officer. And he said to me, he said, Shames, he said, Sergeant, he said, do you know where the hell you are? I said, yes, sir. I know exactly where I am. He said, show me. So I showed him on the map, and he had about 8 of his men in my group. He took them with him. So we kept going. Finally, at 4 o'clock in the morning, I ended up at the 2 bridges that was our mission. And when I got to the bridges, Captain Shettle, my boss, was there waiting. Instead of the battalion, we had 117 men, plus the 18 that I brought. So the first thing he told me, he says, incidentally, I'm supposed to tell you something if I see fit. He said, you are now a lieutenant. Market Garden, as far as the 101st Airborne Division and the 82nd Airborne Division was concerned, was a success. The big failure was the British. The idea was to open up a corridor parallel to the Rhine from Belgium all the way up to Arnhem, Netherlands, where the bridge crossed the Rhine. The idea was to keep the roads open 100 miles from Belgium all the way up to Arnhem. The 82nd Airborne Division and the 101st kept the roads open. The British were supposed to plunge through with their tanks and move, but they forgot something. They forgot that stop tea. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, they had to stop for tea. Don't make any difference where they were. So consequently, they were cut off. We did our job. Our mission was successful. They lost a whole division. We came back from Holland after 72 days of fighting, 72 straight days on the battlefield, a record by the United States Army. We were relieved to go back to France to rest, relaxation, R&R. We went back to France to a place that was 100 miles from Paris. All we could think about was the fact that we were going to Paris. That's all we could think about, because I hadn't had leave since April, and this is now December. So I was the first one on the list. List came out, people going to Paris, 72 hours in Paris. First name on the top of the list was Lieutenant Shames. He was the motor pool officer taking 2 trucks to Paris. 36 men, 2 officers, me and another officer. I was the convoy commander, big deal, two trucks. Now we were in Champagne district of France. You could buy champagne for a pack of cigarettes. Cigarettes cost us 50 cents a carton. That's 5 cents a pack. So we had plenty of champagne. First time I'd ever had champagne in my life. I still love it. Anyhow, the time came about around December the 15th, 16th, and we were listening to the radio, and the German had a breakthrough north of where we were, in the Ardennes of Belgium. but didn't bother us because we were going to Paris. And we had plenty of money. I had a roll of money with choke a horse. And I was going to blow it all in Paris for 3 days. Waited for December the 17th. That was the day that we were going to load up those trucks at 7 o'clock in the morning and head to Paris, 100 miles. Loaded the trucks up, got 10 miles outside of where we were. The truck driver next to me says, "Lieutenant, there's a MP on a motorcycle telling us to pull over." I said, "The hell with him." I said, "We're going to Paris." I said, "Somebody's playing a joke on me." Because I was a new man, new officer of the whole unit, and they all played jokes on me. I said, "The hell with him, let's go." He said, "Sir, that's a captain on that motorcycle." I said, "You kidding?" He said, "No, sir." So I looked out the window. Sure enough, there was a captain. I pulled over. I got out of the truck. I said, "What the hell's going on?" He said, "Turn these trucks around. You've been recalled to going up north in Belgium. Don't know where, but you call. Your unit is being loaded as we talk. You're not going to have time to do anything but change clothes and get on those trucks." That took care of Paris right then and there. Not only that, I was on a brand new uniform I'd never worn it. I'd worn it one time when I tried it on, and I looked like a gypsy with that beautiful uniform all shined up. When I got to camp, I was told, "Don't change anything, put on my coveralls, get any jacket you can find," because all of our heavy stuff was turned in. Because we'd been in field for 77 days. It was all worn up, all of our material, everything, weapons and everything else. You don't have time to do anything. Just grab your weapon, get what ammunition you can, and get on those flat-bottomed trucks. That's what we did. Where we were going, had no idea in the world. We know we were going north to Belgium. Got out of the trucks, had no idea where we were. Somebody saw an old bent-up sign that said Bastogne. Had no idea what Bastogne was, never heard of it. That's where we stayed until January the 21st. And we held off 180,000 Germans, and there were 18,000 of us heading to Berchtesgaden. Went to the head of the line, told by Colonel Sink. He said, "You're going to be the first one in Berchtesgaden." He said, "You're going to be the first one in Eagle's Nest with your platoon." So I said, "Fine." I didn't know what the hell Eagle's Nest was. But when we got there, of course, it was magnificent. And they had everything in the world. They had all the whiskey you could possibly drink, all the food that you could possibly eat. And I told my men, I said, "Okay, I didn't allow you to loot while you were in Belgium or Holland or France." I said, "Now you're in Germany, it's yours. Take anything you want except the innocent life." I said, "If you come across any of the SS people, they'll give you a hard time, shoot the bastards." And they did. So we got to the Eagle's Nest. There we had everything we wanted. We looked around, and we looked at the automobile garage. There were about 4 or 5 of these large limousines, Mercedes limousines. So I figured I'd like to have one of them. So my men got one for me to ride around in, and I was riding around Berchtesgaden in that Hitler's limousine. So finally, Colonel Sink found out about it, And he got raised hell. He called me. He said, "Get rid of that damn car." He said, "You got no business with it." And I said, "Yes, sir." I had it about 3 or 4 days. So I said, "What should I do with it?" He said, "I don't give a damn what you do with it. Get rid of it." So I talked to my number 2 man. I said, "I got an idea." I said, "We're right in front of what are called Großglockner, big mountain." I said, "Let's go up to the mountain a little ways." I said, I went up there the other day, take a look around as overlook. I said, "I want to do something with that overlook." So we went up there with Hitler's automobiles, got out the car, got to the edge of the overlook, and pushed it off, went down about 3,000 feet. That was the end of that automobile. I noticed the guys first went for the silverware and all the other good stuff, and I asked one of the people working there, a Hollander, I said, "Where's the whiskey?" He said, "Down below." I said, "Let's go down and take a look at it." So we went down, and there were those 2 bottles of cognac, label on it, "For the Führer's use only." I grabbed those 2, and that's all I wanted. And I kept one and gave the other one to Colonel Singh. And I brought it home. I knew that it was worth something, just the idea. And I didn't want to drink, because everybody drank everything they could possibly get their hands on at the Eagle's Nest. They drank it dry. My 2 bottles were left. Gave one to Singh. I brought one home. And of course I kept it. And at Steve's bar mitzvah, I decided to open it up and drink it there, which I did. And we did. We had a lot of my buddies there, a lot of my Army buddies. And of course, after we got through, we threw the bottle away. So somebody asked me about, I don't know, a couple of years ago, what happened to the bottle? I said, "The bottle?" I said, we drank it. "What happened to the empty bottle?" I said, "I threw it away." "Threw it away?" I said, "That's right." He said, "You have an idea what that would be worth today?" I said, "Yeah, 2 cents, I guess." He said, "At least $10,000.
I was born in Coronado, California, and raised in the same place. Still live in the same house, the same property.
Wow, you're a lifer.
Oh, yes.
Excellent. When did you join the service?
When and why?
When?
When, in around 1943, I joined the service. I volunteered for everything. My serial number was 1916-4859, and the first digit indicates a volunteer. If it was a 3, then you're a draftee.
So why did you choose the Army?
Because I was a risk taker. And my father was killed in a naval air crash in 1934, so I wandered as I wandered. And for the most part, made my own way and took all the risks that were possible.
So after you joined the service, you were at both Camp Toccoa and Fort Benning. What was that training like?
Well, we originally started at Camp Toccoa, Georgia, a small CCC camp deep in the northeastern woods. For the most part, it was closed, but it was reactivated and kept quiet that we were not to be seen or known for 13 weeks as we trained in everything that was experimental. We did such experiments that you wouldn't believe. Wow. And it was tough going. The regimental colonel wanted athletes and college kids, and I qualified for both. I had 2 years of college before I went in, and I was an athlete running the mile and the 2 miles.
Did being a paratrooper come naturally to you?
That was easy enough because I was in a good physical condition. And the the regimental colonel probably went through 4,000 individuals to get 2,000. So we were a large group. It was the first time when we came in there in Camp Toccoa, Georgia. On Thanksgiving Day, we grouped at an old C-47 body that was just to make construction, climbed a ladder to 36 feet, and they strapped on a harness, and the harness was connected to a cable on the other side of the C-47, and they gave us the D-ring and a reserve parachute, and we were told to jump out, not to look down, but to look out, and transfer the D-ring from one hand to the other. If you fail that one, you're in deep trouble.
Wow. No pressure. So when did you go to England? When did you get deployed to England?
After our training on 3 or 4 different levels for efficiency and coordination with other regiments and the division, we went to Camp Miles Standish in Boston, and were there for several days being processed, and we left for England on the William G. Gothel's steel reinforced concrete Liberty ship with bunks 18 high, 2 feet wide, and 6 feet long.
Very
so
specific.
The trip there was a convoy. We were traveling about 10 knots an hour, and we landed in Glasgow, Scotland on January 1, 1944.
So
and I had the mumps on board ship, so I got special treatment and isolation.
How long did it take you to recover?
10 days.
10 days.
Plus another 10 days in a hospital in Scotland to make sure that things were correct and proper and healthy.
Wow. I was going to say you had about 5 months between the time you got there and D-Day, but about half of the first month was taking care of the mumps. So what did you do for the next 4.5 months to get ready?
We were all cleared and mumpless. and when we ended up in Camp Lambourne in England, and we started our training, most of it revolves around activities that we would be doing in Normandy, not knowing that we were going to Normandy, but somewhere on the coast of France, for sure. So there was Operation Eagle, Beaver, and one other final one that brought us jumping from GI trucks instead of the aircraft because the German bombers were overhead. So those lasted each about a week, and so that used up much of the time.
When did you learn what exactly your mission would be?
The mission, I was unaware of the mission. I was assigned to Lieutenant Colonel Carroll. I had to know what he's doing, why he's doing it, where he was, and had to be able to make contact with him immediately. He was the executive officer of the regiment. So most of the fellows in the regiment saw the area in which they were going to jump in a fabricated diorama depicted at 3,000 feet. I didn't get to see that because I had to work with the colonel.
Right. So talk about the night that you embarked.
Several things happened. We moved from our barracks, our shanties in Lambourne, to present ourselves in good physical shape with the regimental colonel, who stood on a jeep covered with a camouflage parachute and gave us a speech like a Newt Rodney football game speech. He was a knife thrower and had a large Bowie knife on his leg, and he had a 4 foot by 8 foot piece of plywood 3/4 of an inch thick with Tojo on one side and Hitler on the other side. He'd stand at about 50 feet and throw that Bowie knife. But in the beginning of his speech, we called it the knife speech after we heard it. and whatever amounts of speaking he could get through to us, because it was a laughable situation. He reached down to pull out his Bowie knife and it wouldn't come out. So everybody starts laughing, and he reached for his M1 a trench knife and threw that, and it hit the target. And so we all clapped, and he wanted to shake hands with every one of us. So we lined up, and he gave us his admonitions, and we went on for dinner. We had steak and peas, as I remember, and then from there a shower, and then we walked over to our aircraft. Our jump master was Lieutenant Ed Jansen. He was about a 15% Cherokee Indian, so he knew what he was doing and how to fight, and he didn't carry a tomahawk or bow and arrow, but he had a carbine and a sidearm. So I worked with him, and one of the fellows in the squad, Marvin Van Buskirk, after taking a shower, left his dog tags hanging in the shower. And he notified me halfway to the aircraft that that's what had happened. He didn't have them. So I said, okay, we'll take your equipment, Marvin, go back to the shower and see if you can find them. If you can't, then catch up with us and meet us at the aircraft. He couldn't find them. So we tore off 2 pieces of canvas and printed his name on it. He had the best dog tags in the history of the military, because they didn't clank when you ran and rattled in the mess kit. So from there, we packed and repacked our bundles. The equipment we could not carry on our bodies personally, such as machine guns and heavy ammunition, mortar bombs for the mortar, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of military knickknacks that, for the most part, were just too heavy, including radio equipment. So everything we did at that point and up to and including combat was experimental.
So let's talk about you're on the planes now.
Now we're in the aircraft. We we practiced dropping the bombs, or rather the bundles, twice to see that everything was working. We never met the pilot, the co-pilot, and the crew chief, but we saw them wandering around. Some of the fellas wiped their fingers through the exhaust pipes of the engine and put smeared exhaust on their faces, mixed with a little bit of oil from the crankcase, and made Indian fashion out of it for the most part. And then we boarded. I was the last man to board because I always jumped number 1. And we loaded a bundle inside the aircraft, which would be placed in the door just before I jumped. So after all of this repetitive activity that was going on, we boarded at 8:41 English double summertime. And I think the takeoff was at Merrifield Aerodrome. There was 11 of them there. And it was in a shape of a V of V's. Section 16 had 45 aircraft, all C-47s, and within that section 16 were 3 aircraft in the shape of a V. I was on the right forward one on the V of V's. It takes 9 planes to carry a load of 128 jumpers. So we took off at the proper speed, and the engines and the material started to rattle, bang, and I thought the whole machinery was going to come apart on us, but it didn't. I slightly remember General Eisenhower on the field to give us a visit, and he stepped forward from his entourage of people and gave us a salute as we passed by. So I was in the door for the most of the time, and the rest of the guys were sitting sideways the best they could, with looking out the window, trying to discover where we're going and how and where we were. So we were in that area for probably a week and getting orientation, and the takeoff was smooth. We assembled at 5,000 feet. The entire armada was 200 miles long, 10 miles wide, with approximately 982 C-47s. And it took about 2 hours to bring us in and unload us on the continent of Europe, on the eastern coast or western coast of the Cottonton Peninsula. So from 5,000 feet, we moved down to the code name Portsmouth, and its code name was Portsmouth Bill. We passed over that and then dropped to 1,500 feet to get under German radar. About the middle of the English Channel was a U.S. submarine that gave us a signal that we were on target and moving properly. And then we flew up the Bay of Biscay with the Brittany Peninsula on our right and on our left the Cottonton Peninsula. That was really a smart move because we could have turned right and gone into Brittany or left and gone to the Cottonton Peninsula. We turned left at another submarine that was in the Bay of Biscay, gave us a signal, and we entered the Cottonton Peninsula. I don't know exactly the time it was, but the lights started flashing over the door. There was a white light while we're in flight, a green light, and a red light. And as we looked at, I looked out the door of the C-47, and the red light went on. It gives us approximately 8 minutes to get organized and ready to jump. So the jump master gave visual and verbal signals. You couldn't hear much in the aircraft anyway because we didn't have a door that was open. We didn't even have a door. And we had a bundle that was standing right next to me as I stood in the door. Lieutenant Jansen went to number 18 jumper and checked him and made sure that he was okay after he gave the signal to stand up and hook up. Now, there's a steel cable that runs from the pilot's cabin to the aft of the aircraft, and we hook up on that. And that had to be done correctly, otherwise you could get your arm wrapped around the webbing and you're going to lose it for sure. So Lieutenant Jansen checks number 18 and pats him on the derriere, and 18 says all okay, and 17 does the same thing, and so goes on up to me to number 2 and number 3 men. They had a special responsibility of turning on electrical switches and pulling toggles to drop the bundles underneath the aircraft. There were 6 of them, and they weighed 300 pounds each. So that's 1,800 pounds plus the one on the door. At the signal of the red light, we all stood up, hooked up, and checked equipment and closed up tight. So with all the equipment we had, it was a pretty tight squeeze in there with 18 men standing. We were traveling at 276 miles an hour, and no self-sealing gas tanks. There's a good possibility that machine gun fire was coming up through the bottom of the aircraft, but I wasn't positive about that because I didn't feel any bullets changing my plumbing. And after the command stand in the door, I put my left toe outside of the aircraft at the arch and the 2 hands on either side of the door and squatted just a little bit. So 276 miles an hour, prop blast at excessive speed. We can't jump at that excessive speed. We jump between 90 and 100 miles an hour. We're doing nearly twice that. So Lieutenant Jansen made communication with the pilot and asked him to slow the thing down. That didn't happen. And about that time, I was viewing a rectangular corridor of anti-aircraft fire exploding at about 1,000 feet. So it looks like we're going right through it. Now, you know about the crickets?
Yes.
Okay. Do we need to explain anything there?
Each person had a cricket, and you clicked it once, and the response had to be 2 clicks to be.
Well, the response would be 1 click.
Oh, it's 2 clicks first and then 1 click?
We'd click it once, we'd listen, another click, then we'd move toward that click with 2 clicks.
I got
Move again to 3 clicks.
Okay.
By the time we got to 4th or 5th clicks, we might have been standing within 10 yards of one another. And as the green light went on and the red light goes out and the white light is out, I stepped outside the door and I was in a crouched position and the aircraft went up about 50 feet because the 1,800 pounds of load underneath the aircraft was a good release for it. And I was in a squatting position, so when I stepped out, my left arm got caught in the lower left-hand corner of the door because I was squeezed tight, brought my shoulder blades together, and assumed the right position. So I swung out from that point, swung back in and hit the side of the aircraft, swung out again and back in again, and I turned just enough to get my arm loose. And I got a $285 Hamilton wristwatch, which was a real prize then in those days, and it got ripped off. So probably some good Frenchman found it and kept it as a souvenir. Had my name printed on it also. So I made about 2 or 3 oscillations and hit the ground rolling in a pretty good position, rolling forward. And all the equipment I had on, the musette bag came up in front of me, the reserve parachute was in the way, and I couldn't see where I was or what I was doing, but I knew instinctively what to do. I tried to hit the safety piece of equipment that released all the metal clasps that were released that we could step right out of it. That didn't work. So I opened up my double zipper under my chin and pulled out my switchblade knife and started cutting through it. Number 2 and 3 men came up and we 3 got together, and they had a mortar, and we crossed a small canal and got on the decomposed granite road. My clicker, for the most part, fell out of my zippered pouch, and I never did find it. So we used the other guys. We heard a few clicks and waited, and within about 5 or 6 minutes, about 60 guys came up from our left. Now, they would have jumped number 1 through 9 in the direction of the flight of the aircraft. Number 10 through 18 would jump properly and then reverse their direction of flight and return to a particular midpoint. That never did happen. We were spread over a couple hundred square miles, and the company never got together for an entire week. I didn't see the company commander for a week and a half. So we played cat and mouse, and we had a lot of fun destroying communications as best we could, everywhere we could. And our major objective was to take Sainte-Marie-du-Mont, prevent the German tanks from coming in, and disperse all of the German 6th and 1st Parachute Infantry Regiments. Now, one of them was in Carentan, one battalion was in Carentan, another one was in Perrières, and the other one was moving away from the beachheads, didn't find what they wanted, and probably reestablished a strong point, W5, with a German lieutenant were janky in there. They had what we called Goliaths, a radio-operated four-wheeled vehicle with 200 pounds of explosive on it. When the beach forces came in, they were surprised at that. They just shot it up and explosions went off. So they got rid of those in a hurry.
What kind of resistance did you run into?
Immediately, nothing. I landed, for the most part, on Drop Zone D, the northernmost section of Drop Zone D, in dry ground. And I cut my way out. Number 2 and 3 men came up. And then after we grouped together, marching down the road in good formation, I saw a farmhouse about 50 yards off the side of the road and decided we shouldn't investigate that. We had more hand grenades. We had Germans. So I took Floyd Martin to the front door of the house, and I told him, Floyd, don't beat on the door like an ugly American. Just knock on it like a gentleman, and sent the rest of them around to the rear of the house in case there were Germans. He pounded on it, and you could hear that noise from Carentan to San Miraglise. And a Frenchman, within 30 seconds, very blasé about everything because he'd been occupied for 4 or 5 years, came to the door, and he was dressed in a long white nightgown from shoulder to floor. He had a nightcap with a little puffball of cotton on the end of it dangling over one side of his face, and he had a dish with a lighted candle in it. Now, what does that remind you of?
Going to sleep.
Yeah, no. The initials in an English play are CD.
Charles
That's
Dickens.
the author.
Charles Dickens?
Yeah. What's the name of the play?
Christmas Carol?
Yeah, right. You got it. Christmas Carol. And I saw that and I started to laugh. And I suddenly realized that I was making a mistake because my mind was carried away from a joyous situation of sitting in a theater watching a Christmas Carol while I'm actually forced my way into combat. So I immediately brought myself back into realization of a situation rightly understood. So we pushed him aside and put the maps on the floor and I said Carenton about 5 times, and he pointed in several directions. And in the meantime, his wife came in dressed the same way. We indicated we're not going to harm and do anything. We want to know where Carenton is so we can get out of here. So he left in about 30 seconds, returned with 8 rounds of ammunition, gave us 6, and they kept 2. And so off we went and assembled. And the other story is where we went and what we did and how we did it. But that takes a long time because we played Halloween that night.
So at what point did you realize that the Allies had secured the beachheads?
Well, my second lieutenant as a platoon officer had volunteered to lead a platoon to protect General Taylor. And after he landed, General Taylor gave him the strict order of moving to Causeway 4, which was a raised roadway that led to the English Channel parallel to the Douvre River, and make contact with the beach forces coming in. He did that, and the point of contact by time-wise was 11:05 a.m., June 6th. And that has been misrecorded several times, so I would reaffirm that from his words, it was 11:05. And he made contact and then rejoined us a little bit later. We fought for 37 days, playing cat and mouse and destroying communications everywhere we could and organizing our group. So we had 326th, 327th Glider Infantry people with us. We had 506 people and probably 1 or 2 502 regimental paratroopers. So it was a mixed bunch, and we did what we were supposed to do, and we did it in a hurry.
How long did it take you to find your unit?
About a week to a week and a half. They were spread some 90 miles away. The company commander jumped with 5 or 6 guys and was able to pull them together as a squad. Here's the captain, the company commander, captain leading a squad of 5 or 6 men. And so they moved during the night and settled in hiding in the day. And before we jumped, General Eisenhower, as I mentioned, came to us and wanted to know how creative we were. He wants creativity, and he wanted to know how much dog there is in the fight and how much fight there is in the dog. So we told him not to worry about it. We're here to do what we're supposed to do. He indicated, well, he was worried about 80% of you guys being killed. The actual number was 38 that, for the most part, didn't make it. And after he left to take off, etc., and to jump, and then we maneuvered around, leaving the little farmhouse, and fought for 37 days, doing all the kinds of things that we wanted, some individually, some collectively, but we moved fast. And the creativity was important because there were not many vehicles in Normandy, mostly carts carrying ammunition. So to plant a mine in the center of the road with a vehicle, if the driver saw it, he'd stop and investigate. But in moving with a cart loaded with ammunition, and he saw it covered with horse manure, he'd pay no attention to it and drive right over it, and then explosion occurred, and that cart and the soldiers would be destroyed. So it was that kind of hit and run activity. The French farmer, for the most part, were very appreciative of what we were doing, and they gave us milk and cheese and bread, and we hid out as we could, so we could move during the night. So it took about a week to a week and a half to assemble.
So, and I've read from Stephen Ambrose and others that the ingenuity, the adaptability, the improvisation of the American soldier was what really won the day at Normandy.
Oh yeah, we did. We did things from our organization up to, including, and beyond combat. Experimental, innovative, creativity was the key factor, and it carried right on. In fact, our battalion officers in training in Camp Toccoa and from Fort Benning on put chaos in front of us almost every other day. And the idea was to get us tuned into get frightened, brother, get frightened. And then grab a hold of your courage from your fright, take fright apart, and then put it back together again, see what fright made out of you, and then bundle the continuous fright based on all the chaos that's thrown. Store that in the back convoluted areas of your mind, and when you need it, you grab it. And if you get into chaos again, you reduce the chaos to danger, and you reduce the danger to some inconvenience, and then forget it and get on with your combat mission. So that was a likeness that he would like to hear about, and we told him.
I was born in Portage, Pennsylvania, April 29th, 1921. My father took a job there as maintenance, head of the maintenance in the mines. It was a Slavic community, and the only woman in town that spoke English was my mother. And they had a mine cave in, and a fellow named John got killed, and she had to attend a wake with my father. And after a few drinks, they took John up and set him in a chair in a corner, and every time they took a drink, they gave John a drink. And my mother said to my dad, "We are not staying here among these heathens. We're going back to Indiana." So we were in Indiana until I was about 10. And my dad worked for United Aircraft Company. When they moved to Dayton, we were one of the people that moved, and that was May 1931. And we've lived in the Dayton region ever since.
And so you were 20 years old when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. What do you remember about that day, and did that inspire? Is that what inspired you to join the service?
Not at all. A little background on. I grew up listening to veterans of World War I and what they went through over there in the trenches. And more people died from disease than did from combat. And our country became very isolated. They didn't want anything to do with war anymore. And I was the same way. And then when Pearl Harbor, I was working in the defense industry, and Pearl Harbor came along, and that didn't touch me at all. And none of our people around me who had grown up like I did, we thought, the hell with those people over there. We got a notion they can't bother us. We felt the same way on the other side. We're not going to get involved in anything over there. We're not going to pull our chestnuts out of the fire again. And that was pretty generally the way that people felt. And I worked in this defense industry, and we were starting to make some more material. We had the tool end, which I was in, and we had manufacturing end, about 350 people. Nothing bothered me about it until they started drafting men up to age 55 with 3 kids. And here I am, a young man with no family to worry about, and that started getting me. Then we were listening to the ranting and raving of Hitler on the radio every day, and Father Coughlin with his speech. We saw the deterioration of the military thing with Britain and French, and I knew if we didn't get into it, that the world would be different. We had to go. And so for that reason, I quit my job. I didn't have to go. And my boss was very angry, and I said, you know, Ed, I'm just an apprentice. It doesn't really matter much. And he said, these contracts we have are cost plus. I get $5 clear for every hour you're here. I don't give a damn if you sleep in the rag bin. So I went down to the post office to sign up, and I was interested in two things. When I was 5, I'd seen a parachute jump at a county fair in Bedford, Indiana, and I always thought I'd like to do that. But I was passionately interested in submarines, and I read everything I could about it, and the mumps and lung before they could get out of a sub that was disabled, and the professor that went down, BB, that went down in Bath Escape, 40,000 feet. So I went over and talked to the guy, and they accepted me for submarines. And then I said, well, how soon am I going? He said, well, you go on home, they're building the one you're going to be on, be about 6 months. Well, I'm not going to do that, and I can't go back and ask for my job back after what I said. So I went across the hall and signed up for parachute troop, in spite of the fact I'd already signed the papers to be in the Navy. I went to Toccoa, Georgia, where they were forming a new unit, and my mother sent me a letter after I'd been down there about 3 weeks and said 2 people from the Navy came looking for me. I was a deserter. And she showed them the letters that I'd written home, and they said, well, if he's in the service, it's okay, and they left. I can't imagine that we'd have a congressional investigation today, but that's the way things were in those days. Everything was pretty loose.
Now, Toccoa became very famous in the Band of
Well,
Brothers, and you were part of that group.
Yes, Bradley, General Bradley, had gone into this thing with the Germans with their parachute operation in Crete, which was a disaster. But he felt with some changes in the curriculum that it could be useful to the U.S. Army. He ran into opposition from the old Army people. They didn't want anything to do with this. They were quite content to do what they were doing like they did in World War I. But he saw there was going to be a difference. We couldn't fight that way anymore. So he sent a fellow named Major Lee out to Missoula, Montana to see the smoke jumpers and how they did it. And Major Lee came back and gave him a good report and said he thought it would be very nice to have it. So they put Lee in charge of it. Then they had to have a guy to run the regiment. And they picked a man named Robert Sink, a 1927 graduate of West Point, told him that we want you to form a new unit such as the Army has never had, the best that's ever been in the Army. You can have any personnel you want, you can have any material that you want, anything that you want done, nobody can countermand you. 6,500 people right out of civilian life signed up for this. We started middle of July of 42 to the 1st of December. He had what he called an airborne basic. Prior to this, anybody that went into parachute went directly to Fort Benning for 4 weeks. 4 weeks and you were a paratrooper. Then they sent 6 or 7 to one regiment and 8 or 10 to another regiment. But Colonel Sink had another idea. He thought that wasn't good. He wanted people that would start in and have this airborne basic training that he thought of. They would do that, and then they'd go to another place and do further training, then go overseas and go to combat. His idea was he wanted people that started together, worked together, went to combat together, and you'd have a cohesive unit, and you knew by the time the attrition had been finished and you got rid of guys that he didn't think would work, that every man you had there would stay with you. Now, from July until December 1st, that 6,500 people went to 1,650 people. That's how rugged it was. The discipline was terrible. They taunted you all the time about your manhood and the physical things and the lack of food. people got to complaining, and so we had a formation, and he said, here you guys are not happy, and there was a big yeah. You don't like the food, yeah. You think I'm too hard on you, on the discipline, yeah. He said, well, I'm going to tell you something. It's going to get a hell of a lot worse before it gets any better. And that was the end of that. But then we had another session. One of the guys sent a letter home to his mother how bad things were, and she went to her congressman. And the congressman came to Colonel Sink, and he didn't tell us what went on, but he said, I will tell you this. The next guy has a congressman coming to talk to me is going to wish he was never born. And that was the end of it.
That's setting it straight.
We hated this man with everything that was in us while we were in this training. But when we got to combat, we saw why he did this. He wasn't to coddle us, he was to make men out of boys. And we loved that man. He was the only commander at that level in World War II that stayed with his men all the way through. He had 2 offers to get out of our unit and be a general, and he turned them down. That's how passionate he was about us. And he took care of us and made us famous.
And earned your respect eventually.
Yes, we did, and we still do.
Well, you were ultimately sent to England in preparation for the Normandy invasion, and then June 6, 1944 comes. You're one of the first people to jump, right?
Yes.
Where were you supposed to land, and where did you land?
I was supposed to land right where I did in drop zone D, near St. Commandant, right behind Utah Beach. We had 3 jump zones. Jump zone D, in the history books, is called the slaughterhouse. Intelligence didn't tell us rightly what was down there. There were 2 divisions of SS and 2 divisions of Panzer Grenadiers, and we jumped right on top of them. My Colonel Wolverton, he was killed. My company commander was killed. And for 3 days, we only had 1 officer that showed up.
What did you do?
We did what we were trained to do. We were trained to work as a unit, or if the unit got broken up for some reason, we were trained to act individually. If an officer wasn't there or an NCO wasn't there, somebody else stepped in. Nobody appointed anybody, they just automatically did. Privates stepped in. The minute they stepped in and said, I'm in command, you followed them. That's the way we were trained, and it worked out very well. We had to follow through and get the 2 objectives that were given to us. There were 2 bridges across the Douve River that the Germans had put up shortly before the invasion. They were to funnel troops down to the beach to reinforce the beach forces. One was a vehicle bridge and one was a pedestrian bridge. If you denied the Germans access to that, then the beach forces were cut off from any reinforcements. That was our primary mission, and we did achieve that the first day.
And from there, breakout was expected to take less time than it actually did.
Well, the reason for that was they had a lot more German forces there than they thought they had. We were supposed to be there 3 days only in Normandy. General Taylor told us, give me 3 days of hard fighting and you're out. Because we're shock troops, we're not supposed to stay in for those menial things. We're supposed to go in the tough things and stabilize them, and then the other troops come in, but that didn't work. They didn't have anybody else to put in there for that, so we stayed for 33 days. And then at 33 days, my battalion, we jumped 535 men, we lost 75 wounded and captured, and we lost 93 killed out of the 535. And at the end of 535, we were pulled out.
And where were you at that time?
We were in Normandy, just every place we were needed to be. And then they got some more fortresses in, they pulled us out and put them in. But it still took them a long time after that to break out. It just didn't happen the way they thought it would.
It's very difficult, very difficult. Your next participation was in Operation Market Garden, is that
Yes.
correct? And what was your objective there?
The objective there, this was an idea thought up by General Montgomery. We were to jump near a little town called Son, S-O-N. within a day or so, Montgomery was supposed to shove his troops up a road that was 60 miles long going up to the Rhine River. The 82nd had the 30 acres or 30 miles up at the river. We had the 30 miles from Eindhoven up to the 82nd. We were supposed to keep a little two-lane road open, a mile and a half on each side. The Germans would hit us every place they could, and we had to run back and forth and repulse them. As a result of that, every time they hit us, the convoys that were going up stopped. And to get a convoy going, it'd take you an hour or so. Well, that didn't help. But here we're trying to shove 10-foot wide tanks and trucks up that road while tanks and trucks are coming back with wounded and dead. And they take supplies up and come back empty. So it really became chaotic. There was a bridge that we had to take, I think it was over the Wall River. That was key. The British had a group of commandos that were supposed to come in and take the bridge. Unlike Normandy, where they dropped the gliders almost on top of the Pegasus Bridge and took it easily, they dropped these guys 6 miles from the bridge. Well, the Germans are not stupid. They immediately reinforced the people at the bridge, and they couldn't take the bridge. Everybody on the ground knew at that point the operation was done. We were supposed to cross there and get into Arnhem, where the British had dropped 10,000 Polish and British airborne, and they were to be relieved within the first 2 or 3 days. Not taking the bridge, that didn't happen. The Germans had started their armor down toward the Siegfried Line. They brought them back, and they had almost unlimited artillery on the high ground across the river. There's nothing that we could do to help the people in Arnhem. As a result of that, they lost 8,000 dead and wounded and captured. The operation was a failure at that point, period. And the worst part was they took all the supplies from Patton to use for this operation, and Patton was stopped, and he'd been going 20, 25, 30 miles a day. And that was the way it was. I have always maintained, and even General Taylor, I saw in the writings in the book Do or Die by a friend of mine in the 82nd, there was no tactical air support to speak of. If we had had tactical air support, they could have obliterated those Germans around that bridge, and it would have been successful. I never have understood that, and I've talked to every military person, British and American, including General Kennard, and asked why that didn't happen. Nobody can give me an answer on it. I do know why. I just found out why they dropped them so far from the bridge. British airmen were afraid because there was so much flak. They said they didn't want to risk having a plane lost. So for worrying about a plane loss, we lost a war. The war would have been over at that point in Christmas, no doubt about it. Now, the worst part is they did something that never should have been done. High-value troops like paratroopers and glider troops are never supposed to be on defensive position where there's no asset to deny the enemy. There was no reason for us to stay there. They could have put ordinary troops in there and taken us someplace where we'd have done a lot more good. Well, the unit was about 70 days up there in Holland, and we came back to Morvelon, France, and guys started going to Paris, and we were turned in all of our crew-served weapons, most all of the rifles, all of our excess clothing. We were going to go to the States and get a furlough and then go to Guam to get ready to jump on Japan. And about 4 o'clock in the morning, and Sergeant came in, turned on the lights, and said, get up, there's been a breakthrough, you're going. And I said, oh, you're full of shit. We don't have any winter clothes, we don't have any rifles, our crew-served weapons are turned in, but I was wrong. Pretty soon here came semi-trailers with 4-foot sides and no tops on. We loaded up, standing up, not enough room to sit down. They just put us in like cattle. It was a kind of a drizzly rain. We went about 109 miles in that rain with lights on at night. And I knew then that this really was serious. We didn't know what it was. Nobody had any maps of the area, wherever it was. We dumped us off in a muddy field. We started walking, and I saw a little sign that said Berchtesgaden. That's how ignorant we were. We didn't even know how to pronounce the name, didn't know what country it was. They put us in a roughly 20-mile circumference circle around the town of Bastogne. The objective was to stop the Germans from getting to Antwerp, where all of the supply dump was for us. And they were going to use those supplies then to go ahead and invade England. If they had been able to take England, we could not have done anything. We wouldn't have had a base to operate from. So we had to stay there. Now you've heard that Patton rescued us, and that's not true. We did not need rescue. But what he did do was one of the best military moves that was ever made in the Army. He turned the whole Army 90 degrees and rushed them in 200 miles to break through and break the siege. What that did was allow us to take dead and wounded out and bring supplies in. The first 10 days, the weather socked in, they couldn't give resupply to us. When we left, a lot of guys didn't have rifles. If you got 3 boxes of K rations, you were very lucky. One officer from another unit found some ammunition, and as you went by, you picked up whatever was there. But when we went in, here's guys coming back, and they were all disoriented, and some of them crying. And they said, where are you guys going? We said, we're going to fight. And they said, oh, they'll kill you, everybody. They're killing everybody. So we took rifles and ammunition from them, and went up and put in this line, and that's what started it. Now, I have always maintained it didn't need to happen. The 106th Regiment and the 28th Regiment were put in there because that was a quiet place. The 28th had some combat, and they wanted them to give them some rest. The 106th had never been in combat, and they wanted to get him in a semi-combat information just to get used to the area. And they were reporting to intelligence that there was massive troop movements on the other side with tanks and trucks. Intelligence came back to him, said, oh, they're playing records. They were known to do that. There's nothing wrong. That was lack of leadership. In our unit, wherever we were, no matter what the situation, we patrolled every night. If they had sent even one patrol over there, they would have seen what the actual situation was, and they could obliterate it with bombing. So now I'm speaking from the perspective of a PFC, so you got to assess what I'm saying, whether I'm right or not. I haven't talked to anybody above about it, although I did talk to generals about a lot, and never did talk about that. But that's my assessment. But even though I was a PFC, I've been around a long time, been in combat, and I knew what went on. I knew how you should operate, and that thing to me did not need to happen. We were there, the rain quit, the snow started, the temperature went down to as low as 15 below zero. We were dressed in what I have on right here, nothing else. The weather socked in, they couldn't do anything for us. After the planes started flying, the first things came in were not food, it was ammunition. It wasn't clothing. But after they got some relief when Patton came in, then they started giving us overcoats and 4-buckle Arctics, but by that time, most people's feet were frozen, and your hands were frozen, and you were in the first stages of shutting down. You know, when you're really cold, you shiver to keep warm. We had so little food that there was not enough energy, and we quit shivering. And that means you're really in bad shape, and the doctors couldn't understand how we survived. But in that first 10 days, I had 3 boxes of K rations. That was supposed to last 1 day. That's what I had for 10 days. The Germans were slaughtering pigs about 150 yards from us in a little village called Recon. A little pig got loose and came up toward our lines and then turned around and started back. And Sergeant Debo ran out and grabbed it, picked it up in his arms and shot it, and they laid it down in the snow and cut it up and handed it out, and that's what the guys ate. I would not eat it, because at that time almost every pig in the world was subject to having trichinosis, and I wasn't going to get into that. Fortunately, nobody did. But I don't eat raw meat either. My Christmas dinner was snow and lemon powder laced with cordite on the snow. Just the 101st Airborne staff was a little luckier. Some guy scrounged around a building and it had been bombed in Bastogne and found some sardines and crackers, and that's what the generals ate. And that's another nice thing I like about the Airborne. Your top officers, even clear up to generals, suffered with you. They're not way back and saying, go get them. They're out front saying, follow me. And that's one of the reasons you have a great deal of respect for your officers. And there is a familiarity between officers and enlisted men in an airborne unit that you don't see in other ground units. They're more rigid about that. There's lines you don't cross, and you understand that. You keep respect for your officer, but still, he's in the foxhole next to you, and he's suffering like you are, and you become a lot more personal. The operation was very successful, but we lost 80,000 men up there, killed and wounded. The Germans came in and asked for our surrender, and Tony McAuliffe, the general, thought that they were going to surrender to us. And when he was told, no, they want us to surrender, he said, all nuts. What am I going to tell these guys? And General Kennard, who was then a bird colonel, said, well, that last remark you made was pretty good. He said, what was that? He said, you said nuts. So he said, okay, and they wrote it down and gave it to Colonel Harper and said, take them back out and give them the note. They had blindfolded these guys and bringing them in. So they walked them back out through the 327th Glider Regiment, took the blindfolds off, and Harper handed this guy the note, and he said, Neutz, what does this mean? And Harper said, it means we're going to kill every goddamn soldier who tries to get in here, every damn German who tries to get in here. And he said, German said, we'll kill many Americans. And Harper said, I said to him, well, get on your way, bud, and good luck. And later he said, I don't know why I told him good luck, but that's what he did. But then the siege went on. They gave us 2 hours to think this over, or they're going to annihilate us. So we all sat around waiting for this to happen. Nothing happened. People have asked me, well, did you think about surrendering? And I said, no, there wasn't a single soul that ever said a single word about surrender. That was not in our vocabulary. We were trained not to think that way. We are always going to prevail no matter what.
Did you know that once you held and once you were successful there, that the Germans were basically done on the Western Front?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Now, we then, the next operation was going to Berchtesgaden.
Yes.
It was widely felt in the higher echelons that all the top Germans were going to hole up in Berchtesgaden. They had built fortresses underground with food, generators, everything to live, and they thought they were going to have a final push there, that we were going to really have a fight. We entrucked at Munich, got on ducks, the rubber-tired vehicle will go on land or water, and drove up to Berchtesgaden. 2nd Battalion was first, we were second, and the 1st Battalion was in reserve, and we thought we were going to have a real fight going in. There were a few shots fired, but nothing else. When we got in town, there was German military equipment all over the streets, and it was just very quiet. But it was a wonderful time for us. We stayed there a couple of weeks maybe, and the war got over, and we just ran around and scrounged and picked up a little loot and stuff and had a hell of a time.
Did you get to drink the wine?
I don't drink, but there was liquor every place, and that caused a problem. Guys got drunk. They got on motorcycles and trucks and got in wrecks. One guy, a couple guys even got in those spotter airplanes. They got them off the ground. They couldn't land them, so they crash landed them. So they put out an order that any time you captured a motorcycle or a vehicle, you had to shoot through the engine so you couldn't operate anymore. because Colonel said, I don't want to have to send a letter at home to your mother after the war's over and saying you got killed because you got drunk. So that's the way it worked.
Looking out for you again.